Welcome to this video on Jupyter Notebook. So the main purpose of this video is to expose you to the Jupyter Notebook interface. I will take you through the different menu headings and I will give you some pointers as to how to make headings, basic code and what the words mean. So join me on this and let's get going. So I've loaded a Jupyter Notebook over here. You can see that. And you can see that over here is the name of the notebook. For this one, I've called it the Jupyter Interface Basics. You can just edit that as you feel, and then you just press rename. So that's very important. Up here where it's highlighted is the name of the file. It will save it in the folder where you opened this notebook. It's very important that you put the notebook as a CSV file. You save it as a CSV file, which we'll talk a bit more about when we work with actual data in a later video. Then you'll notice the menu headings of here: File, Edit, View, Insert, Cell, Kernel, Widgets, and Help. And then there are a couple of buttons here, shortcuts that you can use if you don't have the shortcut keys. I would recommend that you learn the shortcut keys as you familiarize yourself with the notebook. And you'll see that as you practice more and more and more, it'll become a lot easier to know the shortcut keys. When you go to the Help button over here, you can select the keyboard shortcuts and then it gives you all the different shortcuts. So have a look at that. We'll use a few more than others, but without a doubt, the shortcut keys help a lot. Just as if you would be using Excel, for example. Control F is a find function, Control C, Control V, etc., etc. So these are important functions to familiarize yourself as you go along. But I will guide you with that as we move along in this example in front of us. So if you open the File menu, you'll see here you can open a new notebook. So if you click on that, a new notebook will open up. We've got one here that we are working with, so we're going to do that. You can also open an existing Jupyter Notebook file. Of course, Jupyter Notebook files are IPYNB type. So that will be the type at the end, which you will know is the actual Jupyter Notebook file. You'll notice as well sometimes when you open the folder, say on your desktop, it will look like a PDF, but in actual fact, it's a IPYNB file. And that IPYNB will only show when you open the file from the actual Jupyter Notebook. Right. You can make copies, you can save as, you can rename, etc. These are quite familiar functions that you can use if you are familiar with Word, etc., or Office. The Edit tab, you can see that there are references to cells, which we'll talk about in a moment. You can split cells, copy cells, etc. We'll talk about that in a moment. The View tab, you can toggle header, which will make the header minimize or maximize according to your preferences. Insert, you can insert cells above or below particular cells, which we'll do in a moment. You can see here, there's an A and a B, which refers to the actual shortcut, which we will use. The cell itself, you can run cells. You don't know what that means, but as we go along, I'll explain to you. You can run cells and select them below the current cell that you're active in. You can also run cells and insert below. You can run all above or all below. And we'll use the example below to explain what that means. Now, the kernel is the function on Jupyter Notebook which executes the code. And you will see that as we run the code, as we go sequentially down, there might be instances where there are errors, or you might want to add code above certain cells or below certain cells, which means you need to basically clear all the outputs, all the code that is run, and move back to the top and restart. That'll become clear as we go along. And then the widgets, which we're not going to use at all, allows users to create graphic user interfaces or GUIs. We're not going to be using that, but just so that you're aware of that. The Help tab provides all the assistance you might need. You can see here with regards to the different shortcuts, you can edit shortcut keys, etc., etc. So this is a nice reference tool. You might want to read up a bit on these, and this is where you would find that. The options below the tabs, you've got to save. Now you'll notice that as you go along running the code, the notebook auto saves every now and then. So do not be alarmed if you don't save in a while, although I would always recommend that you continue saving at every point where you can. But at least there is an autosave that is generated every now and then. If you want to add cells below, you can press that, but I'll show you how to do that in a moment as well without using these buttons over here. You can insert cells below the particular cell that you're busy with or active with. You can see here, this blue highlighted part here is where you are currently at, so it's highlighted. So if I press plus, there will be a cell that is generated just below that. You can cut cells, you can copy cells, and you can paste cells. Then you can also move cells up or down. You'll see that sometimes particular code would be better if it moves maybe above other code or maybe below other code. And that evolves as you run the code and get the outputs that you want. So that you would use over here. If you want to run particular cells or run a cell, in this case now, you press that, yeah, you stop or interrupt the kernel. Remember, the kernel runs the actual code, and we clear the kernel. It's sort of code that runs, and you clear the memory, in other words, clear the kernel, which allows you to rerun the entire code, right? Because sometimes you will fill in code which you will deem necessary as you go down running code. So you might feel that you want to identify a certain feature or run a certain graph with specific data, and then you realize, but hold on a minute, I might need to run this particular graph before I run this graph. So what you do then is you interrupt the kernel, you start it over, and then you insert that code above the previous code, and then there would be a natural progression as you would prefer in that case now. Yeah, you would restart the kernel, and then yeah, you would restart the kernel and run the whole notebook. This little tab over here is very important. You've got the code, and then what we're going to be using is the markdown. So the code, if you look at the bottom here, you will see that the code is indicated with a line over here and a print. Now what I'm going to do, just to make it easier to understand, if you go to View and you toggle line numbers, you'll notice that there are specific line numbers that appear. So if I press Enter, you'll see there's a line 2 with code. If I press Enter again, line 3 with code, etc., etc. Right, so this is the code. If I had to change this cell into a markdown, then it does not use code. You'll see at the bottom here, and there are the shortcuts. If I double click on it, you'll notice over here that this is more like a section that informs the reader, specifically within this case now headings or more information. So a markdown does not run code. It provides a opportunity for you as the coder, the programmer, to inform the reader of the sections coming, to inform them of important information, etc., without running code. So as you run the code, in this case now, if I go back to the cell over here and I change it back to code, the code will run with the first one, the second one, the third one, the fourth one. This markdown section over here will not run as code. So it will then continue as you go down. This section over here is also markdown. Then it will go to this section of code. All right. So that's the purpose of the markdown. And then here, you'll see if you click that, you identify all different shortcuts, and that can assist you as well to understand the different functions that the notebook has, which will just make it easier. I really recommend that you familiarize yourself with these important shortcuts. It'll help you a lot. So let's get to the first line of code. Here we've got a print, which means there's going to be an expectation. There's an output in brackets, 2 plus 1 plus 4. So if I press Shift Enter, the output is 4. So the print function is the code that generates the output. You're telling the code to generate the output in brackets, 2 plus 1 plus 1 equals 4. In the second output, remember, Shift Enter, not Enter. If I press Enter, nothing's going to happen. If I press Shift Enter, you'll see something happen. So basically what I did there was just to indicate that there is a print function, but there is no instruction as to what exactly must be printed. So this one, if I want to delete it, you can either go to the cut over there, but an easier way is you just press double D, D twice, DD, disappears. All right. If I want to insert a cell above this one, this line over here, you press A. The cell is above. Let's go back there. So you go back to the highlighted cell. If you want to insert a cell below the cell, you press B. So just to repeat then, if we are active on this cell and we want to insert a cell above the active cell, you press A. If you want to insert a cell below the active cell, you press B. That makes it a lot easier than using these buttons over here. And once you familiarize yourself with these shortcuts, your muscle memory kicks in and you are able to do it a lot more faster. So let's just delete this one over here. We press double D, remember, DD. We want to make the notebook as neat as possible. It doesn't help having open cells. Why would you want to have open cells? So delete the cells. And then we're going to press DD for this one as well. Right. So if we instruct Python to print brackets in inverted commas, single inverted commas, hello world with an exclamation mark, it's going to print, shift, return, hello world. That's the basic principle behind the print function. Now you'll notice that if you watch other videos on YouTube or many courses on the usage of Python or use of hello world is pretty much everywhere. So I'm using it just to familiarize you with what you can expect if you had to watch other videos that explain what I'm explaining right now. So what I've got here now is a markdown. Remember I said a markdown is not an active cell with code. So there's nothing in this cell with 20 lines. You can see the 20 lines that generates a code. So there's no instruction to generate code, which you would then require an output for. If I press Shift Enter, you will notice what the reader will see, what the output will be. You'll see there's a heading over here, which is in bold. Then there is another sort of subheading, which is also in bold. And then I've got bullets with instructions. So shortcuts. Then I say you can access the keyboard shortcuts through the help menu above. You can even create your own if you want to. The most common are, and I'll give you these over here. So Shift Enter, as I said, executes the particular cell. Control Enter also does that. But if you want to run cell quick and move to the next cell, Alt Enter executes the current cell and inserts a new cell below it. Tab indents code, and Shift Tab shows a tooltip for additional information. So a good exercise at this stage might be for you to go and write down all the different or most important types of shortcuts. Now it might be difficult now because you don't quite know what to do yet and what the code is that you would like to be executed. But run through the code, maybe take a printout of the most important code, keep it one side so that you have it at hand should you need it. But you will see as we go along, make a list of the most important shortcut keys that assist you. So now that you see what the output is, how do you generate that? One hashtag generates a main heading. If I add another hashtag, look what happens. It's a smaller heading. You double click on it. If I add a third hashtag, it adds an even smaller heading, bold. So we want a big heading, main heading called shortcuts. We want a subheading with you can access the keyboard shortcuts through that. Then we want, remember now, if I press Shift Enter, you'll see that there are bullets over here. What generates the bullets? An asterisk. You'll notice if I don't put a space between the asterisk and the Shift Enter, look what happens. There's no bullet. So it's very important that you put an asterisk and then you'll see it highlights into blue. That's what you want, because then you know that that particular function is executed by the notebook. So here I've listed all of the respective bullets with a spacing between the asterisk and the subheading, I suppose, Control Enter, Alt Enter, etc., with an explanation, and then I give that to do. So now I'm going to press Shift Return, and there you can see it looks nice and neat. So the second markdown over here, I just explain a bit more detail. So the introduction, yeah, I give you some instructions. Then I give you nice little explanations as to how to do headings and subheadings. So if I press Shift Enter, you'll see the respective subheadings. Very useful, because remember now, the Jupyter Notebook typically would save it as an HTML file to give to a client, your boss, or in your organization, where you can see the code being run and the outputs. So having nice headings that you can make it very neat is extremely useful. So as I explained, you can use an asterisk. There are also what we call latex commands, which refer to mathematical and scientific expressions. Now you can read up a bit more on that on the internet as to latex commands. Here's an example of that. So if you look at this one over here, which I highlight, if I press Shift, you can see what the output is. And the same over here. This is the output. And if I double click on this, this is what generates that output. Now these are what we call latex commands. So let's get to the actual code now. So you'll see we've run the first 3 lines of code. Line 1, line 2, line 3. Then there were 2 markdown cells. This one over here, this one over here. You can see it's highlighted by a blue, which means that is the cell where your cursor is. That is where you're actively at the moment. The next line of code is now the 4th line of code. You'll see over here. What I've got over here are what we call comments. So where you see on top here, I give an explicit line of code, and there's a code output generated. If I put a hashtag in a line of code, and remember these are not markdowns. You know it's not a markdown because if you click on it, it goes blue, and it says code up here, and it says line over here. Okay, so you know that there is no code running for all of these lines, 5 lines, because each of them have a hashtag and they are green. So sometimes you would want to run code, but you also want to put a comment in the code to remind yourself of something around the actual code, maybe your reasoning or your logic or why you put the code. Or it's for the reader of the code to see what your thinking was. So if you look at this line over here, this line of this cell in particular, even though it is a code cell, there is no code to run. There are only comments. So if I press Shift Enter, you'll notice nothing happens. There's no output. But the code has run because number 4 shows over there. Why 4? The first line of code, the second line of code, the third line of code or cell of code, and then the 4th cell or line of code. So there was no code over here, so there was no output because there were only comments. So you can see here, I've made comments. You can add comments to code cells using a hashtag. I explained exactly what I've just said. Also, it allows you the opportunity to not forget about your thinking further down the road. The hashtag tells the software not to run the code, etc. So you can have a look at that. Right, and then you can add the actual hashtag on a Windows computer, control / and command / on a Mac. Right, so let's go to the next line of code. There I've selected, it's blue now. So if I run this code, the hashtag comment will not run because it's a comment, but over here it will run. So you'll notice that I've given code, but then next to it I've given a comment. Because there is a hashtag, this line of code over here will only be read as per that is highlighted. So you can use the comments above or below the respective code or next to it, as long as there is a hashtag before the words in the comment. Very important. So what I've done here is I've assigned a cup holder, basically. I've assigned A to equal 5. Then I say print 5 multiplied by A, which is 5, is 5 times A. And so everything that is in brown here is what is going to be outputted. So it's going to say 5 multiplied by A is, then it's going to do that calculation. Then it's going to say and 3 multiplied by A is, and then it's going to do that calculation. Then I say A is equal to 10. And then I say print 5 multiplied by A is, does that multiplication over there, and 3 multiplied by A is 3 times A, which in this case is 10. So click on the blue, Shift Enter, there's the output. 5 multiplied by A is, that's highlighted over there, then it does that calculation first, 5 times A, and first A was equal to 5. So it's 5 times 5 equals 25. So remember the code works from the top down sequentially. So In this example, we assigned A a value of 5. Then you gave it an instruction to do those calculations. Then you assigned A a value of 10. Then you gave it those instructions. So what it means is it's going to give you two different outputs because A was first 5 and then A was 10. Right, so the first output is based on that first instruction, line 4. The second output is based on the instruction, line 6, with a different A value of 10 as opposed to 5 previously. Great. Next, let's go on to the next line of code, Shift Enter. You'll see again here, I've given a comment. Then I've said, now remember, it remembers A according to the last value that you assigned A. So according to Python now, A is assigned a value of 10 because that's the last instruction you gave it. Remember, it works top down. So you're going to print A is a type of, then this type A is the type of data type that it is. So you get either integers, floats, or strings. And we'll talk about that in a later video. So over here, you've got print A is a type of. You're telling Python to identify the type, the data type of A. Now we know A is 10. So that says A is a type of, and it says int, integer. So 10 is an integer, right? The second line of code is B is a type of. Now in line 4, we told Python that B is equal to 2.1. Now 2.1 is not an integer, it's a float because there's a decimal value. So we're asking it B is a type, see it's in brown, so it's going to output that verbatim. And tell me what data type it is. 2.1 is a float data type. C is a float because it's A divided by B. So there is a decimal, therefore it's a float. So in this case now, C will equal 10 divided by 2.1. So we are telling Python C is a type, verbatim, C is of type, and the type is based on the answer to that. And then we tell it, and its value is C. What is C? A divided by B. What is A? A is 10. What is B? 2.1. So the answer is 4.719, etc. The final instruction you give it is print D is of type, and here I say D is equal to A divided by B, which is basically what C is. So you can define C according to a float value or just dividing it by each other, same thing. So it's two ways of getting the same output. You can see it identifies it as a float and it has the same answer as per the input, the coding assigned to line number 7. So that should give you a broad idea of how the interface works, and secondly, the different data types. So in the next video, what we will do is we will talk about the different types of collections of variables, and I'll just end off the discussion on the Jupyter Notebook interface. So join me using the link on top here. We will finish then the interface of Jupyter Notebook in that video. I'll see you there.